Peace and welcome to the One Black Person Publishing channel, where I share books on writing, editing, publishing, creativity-related subjects, and updates on our current projects, book releases, merch, events, all the things. But this video was part of a series covering some of the most helpful, empowering books that I've come across recently for writers. And this is how we do it. This is a collection of writing advice comprised of 32 essays by prominent black writers and poets, edited by Jericho Brown, who's an award-winning poet and professor himself. Some of the contributors to the book are Nikki Giovanni, Rita Dove, Jacqueline Woodson, Jamaica Kincaid, Ernest Gaines, Terrence Hayes, and it was published in collaboration with the Hurston Wright Foundation. I first read this over a year ago when I was flying through titles on writing advice. And this jumped out at me because it includes so many authors as opposed to most books on writing by, a single author. And if you're a new writer seeking ways and areas to improve and you're not an avid reader yet, this is a good way to find authors who might inspire your work. You might come to admire their work and become either a fan or a student or both. But just as a sidebar, that's one of the reasons why it's beneficial to subscribe to literary journals and magazines. So you get the full variety of voices that you're exposed to. But there's 8 sections of essays in the book titled Who Are Your People, What You Got, Where You At, How You Living, What It Looked Like, Who You With, How to Read, and Going Back. I'm assuming they wanted to stay away from stale and dry vernacular and approach the topics in a more familiar and personal, familiar way. For example, in What You Got, the essays cover the use of personal experience and knowledge about your particular community in your writing. And it asks for an honest assessment of the experiences at your disposal, in your memory or in your collective memory in the community that you're a part of. So the stories that are in your bones, basically. If they titled the section, How to Use Your Experiences to Write Memoir, that only speaks to the result of, what the outcome that you're looking for, which is to have a completed draft of your memoir, at least in the beginning. Ask Where You Got at least keeps a focus on the experiences at the outset and doesn't skip over the events themselves. It assumes that digging deeper into our stories demands objectivity of you in the process. Section How You Living has essays on how writers explore ways of moving through the world in a way that still leaves room for fun and curiosity, despite the fact that the commitment to the work is so serious, and oftentimes the subjects covered also pretty serious. I got a lot out of reading it, but going into it, I was looking for the essays that address things that plague writers consistently and remain relevant year over year to aspiring writers, no matter what technology happens to pop up. And one of the essays I came back to most often is Camille Dungy's essay, Once More with Feeling. Camille Dungy's collection of poetry, Suck on the Marrow, is a American Book Award winner. He's a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship and is professor in the English department at Colorado State. In her essay, she reminds us that our story, much like our memory, is a sensory or sense-based thing. So remember to appeal to the reader's senses beyond sight and sound. Take advantage of the associations embedded in references to our various senses, including our sense of time. But first, before getting to that, she challenges us to participate in an exercise of focus. You set a timer for 1 minute, pick a point of focus, and write everything that comes to mind until the minute is up. If it's the memory of an event in your life, then write everything about that event that comes to mind. And include all the senses. So smell, touch, taste, your interoception, your how you feel inside, proprioception, or how you feel yourself moving through space, where you feel you are in space, as long as it serves the story, of course. But beginning writers tend to limit themselves by disproportionately using sight and sound for their descriptions. And she's betting that if you practice this daily, that even in your descriptions of everyday life, they'll begin to include more rich, dense descriptions and use more other senses that have strong memory associations. The kind that you want to trigger in your reader. The better descriptions of your experience is only one of the benefits that she states. So she writes that if you continue this practice through your normal day, your day-to-day, and to just pay attention to what you write and apprehend, then you'll teach yourself how to be a time bender. And so, for instance, you write about your perspective of the last decade of your life, and you set the timer for 1 minute and you go. So how you recall, retell, and describe is going to differ from how you would write if you were to write about the last 15 minutes of a conversation you had with a coworker or your partner or something like that. And that will differ than, you taking 1 minute to write down the first 15 seconds of thoughts you had this morning. So varying the span of time that you're describing turns out to be a great way to practice and come to understand how to speed up or slow down a story for your reader. And when we train our conscious mind to recall more of what our unconscious mind picks up on, we'll notice just how much attention we pay to our surroundings, and hopefully it'll bring us to become a little bit more present and attentive in our everyday lives. When we come back to write, about any given thing, we'll be more prepared because we'll be practiced at summoning the details for their best use. But she even references how awareness is heightened during certain experiences of crisis, like common example is a car accident, and what it teaches us about time perception. Oftentimes people feel as though that experience could last forever, and they recall every single thing that happened in literally every millisecond, and also feel that time or recall that time passing very slowly. So when writing poems, she says that it's this kind of care for detail that strengthens our time-bending fluency, allows us to alter time for our reader. The second essay is by Frank X. Walker. It's Writing Through Loss and Sorrow, Poetry as a Practice of Healing. This essay stood out to me when I first read it, and stood out to me each time I flipped through the book. And most recently, because I think it's relevant to writers more now than when I initially read it. He tells writers to embrace the power of catharsis available to you, lean into it for its healing power, not just for yourself, but for others, obviously. Acknowledge the grief, fear, and loss all on the page. He walks through a simple exercise called How Much Do You Weigh? And you make 2 lists based on 2 sets of questions. He asks about things that weigh you down or weigh on you, cause you to worry or ruminate, and list the things that make you feel lighter, that energize you or inspire you. It might be certain practices like going for a run, watching a stand-up, visiting art galleries, whatever. Anything that you do that makes the other list feel like it's not such a load to deal with. The kind of questions he's asked are like, what are the things going on in your personal life that causes you the most stress? What makes you angry? What losses are you actively or passively grieving? Whose forgiveness are you still waiting for? And then you take your 2 lists and imagine that you're in a pool of water. Compare the things that make you feel light with the things that weigh you down, and you ask yourself, are you drowning? Is your head barely above the surface? Are you floating easily despite whatever you're carrying? You might think, if I'm going to write, it's going to be for my fiction book or for my collection of poetry or whatever it is that you're working on, but that you're not going to spend extra time doing journaling exercises on top of the writing that you feel you need to do. But if you've never experienced a creative shutdown after facing grief or sorrow or loss, then this is exactly the kind of exercise that you may need. He even includes a process for turning those responses into useful materials for poems, which is pretty cool to experiment with too. Journaling is well documented to be beneficial, so this exercise has to have some therapeutic benefits in addition to the creative ones, like having a long list of topics to write about now, so you feel less blocked or shut down less often. One of my favorite quotes from the essay is actually him quoting Nikki Finney. She asks, what is it that you're trying so hard not to say? That's a great question. Gets you to force you to write about hard things, the things that you normally wouldn't, and makes you write the words, and it helps the other words that you need to write flow a bit more easily. But Frank Walker, he's written numerous collections of poetry, most recently Masked Man Black, pandemic and protest poems. He's won many awards and is director of the MFA program in creative writing at University of Kentucky. The last essay I'm going to share a bit about is by Mitchell Jackson. His debut novel, The Residue Years, won the Hurston Wright Legacy Award for fiction, and he's received Ernest Gaines Award for literary excellence, and teaches creative writing at University of Chicago. His essay is on revision, and it provides an opportunity for new writers to become more stay hopeful and open-minded during the process. It's really easy to think of revision as simply correcting grammatical errors or edits, and he makes sure that we keep revision in mind as a philosophy in addition to being a process. But process first. The process of revising your completed work begins with assessing the content. He suggests asking questions about what the audience is, what's the purpose of you telling the story, what arguments are you making in your work, no matter what form it is, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, memoir, poetry, what have you. Second is organization. You interrogate if you have the right structure. If you've ordered your ideas and paragraphs to the best effect for your story, and how do your transitions flow. Third step is expression. This is where you consider your style choices, tone, things that distinguish your voice without compromising the story. And then the last step is often conflated with the entirety of the process, that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which involves the mechanics and format. Grammar, punctuation errors, misspellings, omitted words, which actually happens a lot more often than you would think, even for experienced writers. What interested me most about his essay was the idea that revision is a philosophy. More specifically, he says that revision is revolution. He defines it as seeing the work in progress in context, recognizing the parts of the text and how they work to form a whole, seeing what could, should, and shouldn't be there, and imagining ways to address it. Figuring out what's wrong, not what's wrong, but what's right, and how to make it more right for the reader. In that way, you have to envision your draft as being even better than the separate parts might suggest, which is different thinking than simply correcting grammatical errors. So how much less would writers agonize over revisions if it was approached with more imagination, vision, and possibility, rather than the more reductive, negative rap that editing and revision gets most of the time. Revolutions liberate people, and though he never says it explicitly in his essay, stories liberate people too, and stories provide content for personal revolutions. Books intervene in that sort of way. They're disruptive to our thinking in a way where we get to think more broadly, more pointedly, and towards more of an accepting way of viewing the world. But if the story you plan to tell or the collection of poems you want to write are approached with the intention of stirring personal revolution in one particular reader, how differently might you tell it? How different would your energy be when you sit down to write? There's so many great writers here and so many lessons to pass along. I'm sure I'll revisit and share other things from this book. One at the top of mind is on characters, how to write characters who you don't have anything in common with in terms of circumstance or background. Is really great for that as well. But until then, I hope you got something from this video to take with you and use in your own writing life or life generally. Hit like if you found it helpful, and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Thanks for watching.